2 more sleeps until Paul McCartney's new album, The Boys of Dungeon Lane. Welcome to the Tainted Tavern.
Welcome to the Tainted Tavern. Come sit inside for free.
Okay, so we're now on Wednesday the 27th, so we've got 2 days to go before Paul McCartney's new album, Boys of Dungeon Lane, comes out. I've got it on pre-order, I've got a CD, and I've also got a vinyl. I've just gone for the black vinyl this time, and I'm really excited about that. And lately Paul's been everywhere. He was on Saturday Night Live recently, he's been on the Colbert Show, he's doing shows left, right and centre. And as usual, the dickheads are out now criticising his vocal range. And basically, they're criticising the way he sounds now, which to me is fucking rubbish. These people, they're not really fans of Paul McCartney the artist, Paul McCartney the man. Paul McCartney the man who has been part of our lives since the early 60s, you know, throughout the Beatles, throughout Wings, throughout all the solo stuff, who has in many ways changed a lot of our lives and given us so much. They're not fans of that, they're fans, and even the term fan is arguable when they criticise his voice, like how dare he gets old. People claim they want authenticity from their artists, but that's only if that authenticity doesn't involve aging. I mean, Bruce Springsteen doesn't these days sound like 1975 The Boss. Johnny Cash, when he released Hurt, that song would never, his version of that 9 Inch Nails song would never have been so powerful without the weather-beaten quality of his voice. David Bowie, Black Star, that worked because of the aging and the mortality. You could actually hear it in the voice. Bob Dylan, someone whose voice has been attacked ever since he was a young man. These days, it's got such a maturity, such an emotional impact. It's just incredible. And Paul McCartney is the same. He is 84 years old. So when he appears on Saturday Night Live, and he gets up incidentally, and he did a couple of songs, he did Band on the Run, that's valid to criticise him for doing Band on the Run because he does that song too much. There are reasons, I think, valid reasons to criticise Paul McCartney. When you look at some of his output from the 80s, which was too safe, too overproduced, what John Lennon used to call granny music, but criticising him because that his voice has aged together with the rest of him, that's just unfair. You can't, I mean, have anyone seen Clint Eastwood's latest movie, or maybe a couple of movies ago, The Mule? Really good film, but Clint Eastwood did not move like in that movie like the man with no name. He didn't move with that youthful swagger of the man with no name. How dare he do that? This criticising of Paul McCartney because his voice has aged is absolutely stupid. You know, it's how dare he's not 27 anymore. I mean, it just really, really, really fucking annoys me. And I've heard a couple of the tracks from the Boys of Dungeon Lane, Home to Us, and The Days We Left Behind. And yeah, Paul does sound like 84-year-old Paul McCartney. His voice has a quality which only comes from aging. That sometimes there's a weakness, he can't hit the notes. But you've got to remember that Paul in his prime, he had a massive vocal range, one of the best rock and roll voices ever throughout history, in my opinion. I mean, he had something like a 4-octave vocal range. He's not going to have that at 84. I see my father is 80 now, you know, and he can't play football with me like he used to when he was 25 and 30. It's just fucking nonsense anyway, and these people are not fans. I mean, the criticism I constantly hear about Paul McCartney's voice really annoys me, really gets on my tip, because I think it's unfair criticism, and there are so many reasons, as I say, to criticise Paul McCartney, the Frog song for one. But this is unfair fair criticism. I mean, Paul McCartney's not one of these artists who seem to have had loads of work done, you know, so that you see some of them, especially actresses, very beautiful actresses who these days their faces are pulled back, their eyes are like this because they've had so much work done. They look like a rabbit caught in an headlights. It's fucking absurd. I love mature McCartney. I love 84-year-old Paul McCartney. I love the lived-in quality of his voice. And as far as I'm concerned, the 2 songs I've heard so far from Dungeon Lane are absolutely superb. And his voice works. He's still the same Paul I've always been a fan of. He's the same Paul who was Beatle Paul, who was Wings Paul, who was Solo Paul, who was 1980s period Granny Paul. He is that same Paul, and he hasn't had all this work done on his face either, which is something to commend him for. As far as I'm concerned, Paul McCartney still looks very much the same as he did when he plays Elvis's mother in the movie Blue Hawaii. But anyway, that's just a little rant there, because I feel that there are many reasons to criticise an artist, and some of them are valid reasons, because someone who has had such a long career as Paul McCartney is sometimes going to come out with some duds, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the guy is an absolute genius and he has given us so much that we should be grateful for over the years. So in anticipation of the boys in Dungeon Lane landing, and there will be a review on this channel very soon, I want to listen to the full album several times before I do post my review, because that's what I usually do with McCartney. I've been a fan of McCartney for many years. Usually when he gets a new album, I mean, going as far back as Press to Play, I've had every McCartney album on the day it's come out, and I tend to play it constantly for the first 2 days. It's constantly on rotation. So that's what I want to do with Boys at Dungeon Lane. So my review for Boys at Dungeon Lane will probably be a bit later than other reviews, which no doubt, this comes out Friday, no doubt there'll be reviews by midday Friday. But my review definitely, if there is criticism of the album, and I'm hoping not, because I think this is going to be a late career masterpiece. I've got a feeling it may be his last album, although you can never tell with Paul. He's such a contrary dude. I mean, his last album, McCartney 3, that came completely out of the blue during COVID, during lockdown, or rockdown as Paul called it. So I'm really looking forward to that. But in anticipation of that, I thought I'd like to review an older album of Paul McCartney's. And this is a strange one for me, because I really love this album now. And for many years, I wasn't a massive fan of it. I got into McCartney in the mid-80s. Because I was too young for the Beatles. I mean, I was born in 1965, so by the time the Beatles had split up, I was only just over 4 years old, going on 5, so I wasn't really aware of it. And when punk first burst onto the scene in the mid-70s, I was totally seduced by punk. I joined a band. We had a band in school, me and a few mates of mine. We started our own punk band. We were called Vibrating Flesh. We were shit. We did a good version of the Clash number Death or Glory. But anyway, we were shit. But so the Beatles, to me, were a band who I'd sort of been aware of, but as far as I was concerned, they were dinosaurs. They didn't count. They wasn't relevant in this new punky arena that I was so heavily involved in. And of course, during our period, I was aware of McCartney. You couldn't not be Mullican. I was huge. But I wasn't the Beatle nut that I became in later life. When John Lennon was sadly taken away from us in 1980, I wasn't really a Beatle fan then. I only knew of the Beatles rather than knew the Beatles. That would come late. So when I did start to get into the Beatles, I think it was around the mid-80s. I was interested, because the Beatles these days are ubiquitous. They may as well be an operating band because they're everywhere. But in the mid-80s, they weren't really being listened to. They were kind of a nostalgia act the older generation talked about. And obviously we knew some of the songs, the massive hits of the Beatles, things like I Want to Hold Your Hand and She Loves You. But to me, during our period, this wasn't really good music. I was listening to bands like the Sex Pistols, the Clash, Sham 69, the Undertones to some extent, UK stuff like that. And my dad used to want about the Beatles, and this is when the connection was made for me, because one Christmas, I think it was around 1985, I bought my father a vinyl album, a copy of Hard Day's Night. I never gave it to him, but I bought him for Christmas. I put it on my record player, and something connected with me. Now, I've got a massive CD collection, I've got a massive vinyl collection, I've always been a big music fan. As I say, I was in a band when I was earlier, so I've always been a music fan. But something connected to me that first time I heard the Beatles that no other music has ever connected to me. And I've got a theory about that, and this will probably make you laugh, but I genuinely believe that because I love a lot of music. I'm a huge fan of jazz. I like a lot of early blues music. That pattern you can hear my English bulldog Maddie walking around the room. We've taken all the rugs up, we're doing a bit of a spring clean, we've taken all the rugs up so she's walking on the bare floor. So I excuse the padding. I've ordered a new microphone to do future videos because I'm using the on-camera microphone. I bought a really good camera, not a cheap camera, a Nikon Coolpix P1000, and I'm using the built-in microphone. So if the audio is a little bit poor for this, I apologise for that. But anyway, I bought my father's an Hard Day's Night. I spun it and it connected with me, and I never ended up giving it to him. That day, to this day, I became a Beatle nut. I went out and got all the Beatle albums slowly, bit by bit, those days, buying most of them on cassette tape. This was pre-CD. CDs didn't really make an impact, and the Beatles didn't initially come out on CD. I think it took a while for the Beatles to be released on CD. So I started buying them all on cassette. I went through the entire canon, and I became obsessed. I'm still obsessed. I love the Beatles, and they are my favourite band ever. But I do realise that the Beatles, you know, when I put on this say, Please Please Me, these guys are in their 20s. George Harrison at that point hasn't even gone into his 20s. These guys are in their 20s. So when I listen to an album from a later period, say mid-80s, something like George Harrison, Cloud 9, brilliant album, he doesn't sound exactly like 20-year-old George Harrison. And I can't remember anyone criticising him at that period because he didn't sound like 20-year-old George Harrison. So I don't see why people should be criticising 84-year-old Paul McCartney because he doesn't sound like 27-year-old Paul McCartney. But I got into him in about the 80s. So the first current Paul McCartney album I ever bought, and by the word current I mean when it came out, and that was Press to Play. Press to Play is a much derided McCartney album. I love it. I absolutely love it. I don't see any problems with it at all. And I'm not sure if my love for that album comes from the fact that it was the first current McCartney album that I ever purchased, or if I love that experimental Paul. And I think I do love that experimental Paul more than straight down the middle of the road, safe Paul. I think I do love that Paul. Which is why the album I'm going to talk about today, Tug of War, which was a massive hit when this came out in '82, has never really appealed to me. There's some lovely tracks on it, don't get me wrong, and to be honest, talking as I am today, with today's mindset, I think it's a fantastic album. I think it's a masterpiece, but for many, many years I couldn't get into it. And it's only this year, 2026, that it really connected with me, that I really sat down and gave it time, and I listened to it. So I've made some notes here because I've been listening to this album constantly over the last few days, using my vinyl, and this is an original vinyl of the Tug of War album. I didn't have this when it first came out. This came out in '82. I had yet to discover the delights of the Beatles and the solo Beatles and all that stuff, but I purchased this in a second-hand shop, but it is an original. I've also got the archive edition of this CD, archive edition, which came out several years back, and this contains a bonus audio disc with demos on here. But I've been listening to this constantly now. A few interesting things about Tug of War was George Martin was brought in to produce this album, to produce the full album, which is the first time McCartney had worked with George Martin on a full album since the Beatles, since Abbey Road, in fact. I mean, he had worked with George Martin a few times on certain tracks. Live and Let Die, for instance, was produced by George Martin. But this was the first time that they did a full album. Also, this was Paul's first album since the assassination of John Lennon. So there are several songs on here which address that issue. There's a lovely ballad on here called Here Today, in which Paul is answering the critics who at this time said that for the last few years John and Paul hated each other. That just wasn't true, and Paul answers that in the song Here Today. But we'll go through this track by track in a moment. Some other points about this album. Carl Perkins features on Get It. And Stevie Wonder, of course, is famously on two of the tracks on you. What's That You're Doing, and Ebony and Ivory. Ebony and Ivory was a massive hit. In '82 it was huge in America and the UK and other places in the world. And that's a song that I've always mocked because it's a lovely sentiment, you know, racial harmony, black and white, people are the same wherever they go, side by side on my piano. It's a lovely sentiment, but it's too simplistic for my liking. It's the same, I suppose, as John Lennon's song Imagine, which again is a lovely sentiment, you know, imagine all the people, blah, 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 blah. But it's Lennon's Imagine is in some way like the Communist Manifesto, but it's too simplistic, and that's what I felt about Emily and Ivory. But these days, I can enjoy it for what it is, and it is a lovely sentiment, you know. But it's, you know, the answer to racial harmony, to ending the problems between blacks and whites, is not for you to sit side by side on a piano, living in perfect harmony. So it's a bit simplistic in that sense. The cover design for this, the photograph was taken by Linda McCartney, and the cover design was done by Hypnosis Studio, who were responsible for a lot of classic rock album covers. They did a lot of Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon is one of theirs. They did stuff for Led Zeppelin, lots and lots of stuff. On the back of here it says this album was mixed digitally, which I had to look up what that actually meant, because this album was pre-CD. But what it was is they were using, George Martin used a new digital state-of-the-art mixing desks to mix everything together. And it allowed, so even though the original tapes, and this was recorded analog, every time you bounce down a track to fill it out, you'd lose quality. But by doing it digitally, that they retained everything every time they bounced a track down to create more channels. Anyway, let's go through this track by track now. And I made note here of the album. So the first track, Tug of War. The lyrics like, with one thing and another we were trying to outdo each other. This to me, I think that Paul, I mean I don't know for certain, Paul says that it's just about the differences between people. There's a refrain that runs through the song going pushing, pushing, pulling, pulling, and they use the metaphor of a tug of war, which is a sport that was once an Olympic event. But I feel that Paul's addressing a lot of the relationship between him and John. What with one thing and another, we were always trying to outdo each other. I think there's a lot of that in it. It's a fantastic song. It's wonderful. McCartney's vocal, okay, he's not 84 at this point, but McCartney's vocal is excellent, and George Martin's production really gives the depth of the song. That then leads into Take It Away, which is a very, very polished pop song. Ringo Starr plays drums on this, and it's kind of a song, one of Paul's character songs, but he uses various characters throughout the song. There's an impresario, there's a lonely driver driving through the night, and they're all listening to this artist performing, and their message to the artist is, take it away, I want to hear you play till the morning comes. It's a lovely song. Then we've got Somebody Who Cares, which is a lovely acoustic ballad with some great Spanish guitar playing from McCartney. Those three songs offer a perfect 1-2-3 opening to the album. Then we're into What You're Doing, which is the first of two duets with Stevie Wonder. This, to my mind, is the weakest song on the album, but that's just my opinion because I've never really connected with disco McCartney when McCartney went into that disco-y type stuff. Although saying that, I can contradict myself because I do love the Wings song Goodnight Tonight, so, you know, I mean, well, it is what it is. After that, then, we've got Year Today, which is the heartfelt ballad that McCartney wrote for John following his death, and he's got lines like, what about the time we met? I suppose you could say that we were playing hard to get, but we could always sing. And then Paul asks John in the song, you know, what he would say if he was here today, and Paul answers that with, "You'd probably laugh and say that we were worlds apart, but I love you." It's a beautiful song. Then on the vinyl, that's the end of side one. We flip it over, then we into Ballroom Dancing, which is like a late Wings era track, but it's a fun track. It's straightforward, bouncy type of pop that McCartney does so well. It's a great track, and McCartney liked it so much that for some reason a couple of albums later it came back on the Give My Regards to Broad Street soundtrack. But it's okay. Following that then is what I think is a masterpiece. It's called The Pound Is Sinking, and it's got a lot of the Uncle Albert and Admiral Halsey to it, and there's a couple of songs stitched together. And interestingly, George Martin, who of course produced this, also produced Uncle Albert and Admiral Halsey. And him and Paul had a history of working together to stitch unfinished songs together, all the way back to the Beatles, you know. Famously, it was done probably for the first time, I would say, in A Day in the Life on Sgt. Pepper's, where they took an unfinished John song and an unfinished Paul song and joined it together and created the masterpiece that was Day in the Life. Then it was done later on Abbey Road for the entire side 2 medley of all those little songs, unfinished songs, which were snipped together. That medley on side 2 of Abbey Road is the reason that years were invented. And yes, Paul doesn't sound admittedly like 84-year-old Paul there, but then he wasn't 84-year-old Paul, was he? But I'm glad he's still here making. But why does aging offend music fans? I mean, fuck's sake. Oh, never mind, let's not get back onto that. So for The Pound Is Sinking, as I say, it's an absolute classic masterpiece that should be better known than it is. I think it's a fantastic song. I think the only reason that it's not given as much kudos as it deserves is that it's on an album amongst such other strong material. But I think The Pound Is Sinking is excellent. And then it follows on to another masterpiece, Wanderlust. Wow. A song where Paul is telling of a time in the Virgin Islands when they had to take the ship, the Wanderlust, out to sea to avoid being boarded by a load of drug enforcement officers because Paul had some of his wacky-backy that he used to like on board. I wonder if 84-year-old Paul still smokes wacky-backy. I bet 84-year-old Paul can't draw as deeply as 27-year-old Paul used to. How dare he get old? Following on from that, then we've got Be What You See, which is, it's not really a song, it's an unfinished snippet. Who do you want? It's kind of like on the White Album where they've got a little snippet in the middle on side 1, is it? I think side 1 on the CD. I'm not sure if it's side 1 or side 2 when you're playing the original vinyl. But it goes, can you take me back where I came from, brother, can you take me back? Well, it's kind of that type of thing. Then after that, we're into Get It, which is Paul's duet with Carl Perkins. Carl Perkins, of course, being one of his all-time heroes from the early days of the Beatles, when the Beatles briefly changed their names, adopted stage names early on in their career. George Harrison became Carl Harrison in homage to Carl Perkins. But you, Paul, when he's in the studio and they're recording together, it's just wonderful. He sounds, you can hear the enjoyment of performing with Carl Perkins in his vocal performance. The song ends with a bit of laughter of Paul and Carl laughing. And that comes from the fact that, well, while they were out recording this album, there was a luxury Royal Navy yacht docked. And the captain invited Paul and Carl on board for a meal. So they're on this luxury yacht and they're in this wonderful dining area, you know, stinking of money. Well, there's no object here and there's champagne everywhere. And Carl Perkins, who was brought up in abject poverty, I mean, Paul wasn't brought up in a wealthy family. Paul was brought up working class, but Carl Perkins was brought up in proper poverty. He used to work in the cotton fields, you know. And Carl Perkins looks at all this champagne and stuff, and he says, you know where I come from? we call this shit in an eye cotton. And that amused Paul, that saying, shit in an eye cotton, to suddenly mean that you've made it, that you've got success, and it amused Paul. And while they were recording the song Get It, they were playing around with each other. Either Paul or Carl said that line again, like shit in an eye cotton, and they just cracked up in laughter. Now George Martin knew he had to edit that line out of there because you couldn't have the line shit in an eye cotton in a 1982 mainstream pop album and expect to get away with it. But Paul insisted that they keep that spontaneous laughter, and it really works well to close up the track. So after that, then you've got Dress Me Up as a Robber, which is a kind of bouncy, kind of armless, kind of Paul song. Almost of the type that John Lennon would call granny music, but it's a nice bouncy song, it's enjoyable. And then the massive hit of this album, Ebony and Ivory, closes down the album. The duet with Stevie Wonder, which speaks about racial harmony, but as I say, it's kind of comes across as a little corny and simplistic. Though it wasn't considered so at the time, it was massive. It was a #1 hit in both the UK and the US. And elsewhere in the world, it was absolutely massive, and you just heard it everywhere. So anyway, that's Tug of War, an album that has significantly grown on me over the years. There are several McCartney albums that I haven't really connected with over the years, and I mean, you know, maybe they will grow on me. Tug of War is definitely a great album, largely seen as a return to form in '82. Because McCartney had a couple of duds in his late Wings era. Back to the Egg, which is a Wings album that many people love, I think that's rather weak. And of course McCartney 2, which these days has been re-evaluated. McCartney 2 is these days seen as a very, very strong album, but back then it wasn't considered so. So, Tug of War, I hope you've enjoyed this review. Give this review a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. And I'm 60-year-old now, so I hope I haven't presented this video like a 60-year-old man. If YouTube had been out 40 years ago, I would have done it as a 20-year-old man, but I don't think that's a valid reason to criticize me. So anyway, thanks for watching. See you soon, and come back soon to the Tainted Tavern!
Come back soon.